I will never forget the sound of that spoon tapping against the crystal champagne flute. It was a sharp, high-pitched ping that sliced through the low murmur of our Thanksgiving dinner like a knife. That sound was designed to command attention, and it worked perfectly. My younger sister Tiffany stood up at the head of the table. She smoothed down her silk dress, took a dramatic breath, and looked around the room with a smile that was equal parts radiant and smug. She looked like she was about to accept an Academy Award, not just make a family toast. Mom and Dad were beaming at her from their seats, their faces glowing with a mixture of pride and relief that I recognized instantly. I sat there, gripping my fork, feeling the cold weight of the folder resting in my tote bag under the table. I knew what was coming. I had known for weeks. But hearing her say it out loud was a different kind of twisted entertainment. Tiffany cleared her throat and announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, that Mom and Dad had made a decision. "They are signing the house over to me," she said, her voice trembling with mock humility. "This house is officially going to be mine." And then, she turned her eyes directly to me. Her gaze wasn't warm, it was sharp. She added, almost as an afterthought, but loud enough for everyone to hear, that since I had chosen to leave the family and move to the city, I would be getting nothing. The room exploded. My aunts and uncles cheered. My cousin whistled. Someone yelled out that it was well-deserved. I watched my mother dab a fake tear from her eye. I watched my father puff out his chest, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. And I watched Tiffany soak it all in, believing she had just won the lottery. She had no idea she was actually holding a live grenade. I didn't clap. I didn't gasp. I just took a slow sip of my iced tea and set the glass down with a deliberate thud. I looked at my father. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, the smile slid off his face. He knew that I knew. I leaned forward slightly and said, in a voice that was soft but cut through the cheering like a razor, "Dad, are you going to tell them the rest of the story, or should I do the honors?" The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. But before I tell you how that dinner ended in chaos, police involvement, and a fiancé sprinting out the front door, I need to take you back. You need to understand that this wasn't just about a house. This was about a lifetime of being the invisible child in a family that only valued appearance. My name is Sarah. If you looked at my family from the outside, you would see the American dream. A large colonial house in a wealthy suburb, 2 cars in the driveway, manicured lawns, and holiday cards where everyone wore matching flannel. But inside those walls, the air was always thin. It was suffocating. My parents, Mark and Linda, didn't raise 2 daughters. They raised an audience member and a star. Tiffany was the star. She was the golden child from the moment she was born. She was loud, demanding, and charismatic. She sucked the oxygen out of every room. I was the audience. I was quiet, studious, and independent. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in that house was to need nothing. If I needed nothing, I couldn't be disappointed when I got nothing. When Tiffany wanted dance lessons, we had the money. When I wanted a tutor for advanced calculus, things were suddenly tight. When Tiffany wrecked her first car, Dad bought her a replacement within a week because she couldn't possibly take the bus. When I needed a co-signer for my first apartment after college, they gave me a lecture on responsibility and told me to figure it out myself. So I did. I figured it out. I built a career in finance, moved 3 hours away, and created a life where I didn't have to compete for scraps of affection. But the thing about toxic families is that they don't like it when the scapegoat escapes. They need you to come back. They need you to play your part. And that is exactly what happened 6 months before that Thanksgiving dinner. It was a scorching hot Saturday in July. My mother called me, her voice pitched high with that frantic, breathless tone she used when she wanted to manipulate me. She said I needed to come home immediately. She said it was a family emergency. She wouldn't give me details, just said it was critical. My stomach dropped. Despite everything, that old instinct to please them, to be the good daughter, kicked in. I drove 3 hours in heavy traffic, imagining someone was sick or injured. When I walked through the front door, there was no emergency. There was just a staged scene. My parents were sitting at the dining room table, the same table where everything would eventually burn down. There was a pitcher of lemonade, a plate of cookies, and a thick stack of documents sitting in front of my father. They sat me down. They poured me a drink. They asked me about my job, which was suspicious because they usually changed the subject whenever I talked about my success. Then Dad got to the point. He put on his serious businessman face. He told me that they were getting older and they wanted to secure the family legacy. He said they wanted to refinance the house to get a better interest rate, but because of some complicated banking age restrictions, which was a lie, they needed a younger cosigner. He slid the papers toward me. He said, "Sarah, we want to put your name on the deed. The house will eventually be yours anyway, so this is just a formality. We just need a signature right here." I looked at the papers. Then I looked at them. They were watching me with a hunger that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It felt like walking into a trap. My father was tapping his pen on the table, a nervous tick I hadn't seen in years. My mother was smiling so hard her gums were showing. I work in finance. I look at contracts for a living. And something about the way the papers were folded, hiding the headers and just showing the signature lines set off every alarm bell in my head. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I picked up the whole stack of papers. I told them I needed to read through them properly. I said I would take them back to the city with me and have my lawyer look them over. The reaction was instant and volatile. My mother's smile vanished. She started crying, accusing me of not trusting my own flesh and blood. She said I was being cold and calculating. Dad got angry. He stood up and slammed his hand on the table. He told me I was being ungrateful, that they were trying to give me an inheritance, and I was throwing it back in their faces. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult, Sarah?" He shouted. "It is just a signature. Do you think we are trying to trick you?" I looked him dead in the eye and lied. I told him, "Of course not, Dad. I just want to make sure we do this right so the bank doesn't cause issues later." I lied to get out of the room. I lied because I was scared. I took the folder, ignored their guilt trips, and drove back to my apartment with my heart pounding in my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my floor with a glass of wine and went through those documents page by page. And what I found made me physically sick. It wasn't a refinance for a better rate. It wasn't a gift. It was a transfer of liability. My parents weren't just refinancing. They were in massive debt. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house years ago to fund their lifestyle and, presumably, to fund Tiffany's lifestyle. They hadn't paid property taxes in 2 years. The bank was threatening foreclosure. The documents they wanted me to sign would have put me on the title, yes, but they would have also made me 100% legally responsible for the nearly $400,000 they owed. They weren't giving me a house. They were trying to steal my credit score and my future to save themselves from drowning. They wanted me to be their lifeboat. I sat there on my floor, staring at the numbers, realizing that my parents didn't love me. They saw me as a resource, a tool. I cried for about an hour. I mourned the parents I wished I had. And then I stopped crying. I wiped my face and I got angry, cold, hard anger. I called my dad the next day. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I just told him simply that my lawyer advised against it and I wouldn't be signing. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then my father said something that chilled me to the bone. He said, "Fine. If you are too selfish to help this family, we will find someone who appreciates us." He hung up, and for a month I didn't hear a word from them. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they would have to sell the house and downsize. I thought reality had finally caught up with them. But I was wrong. They didn't sell the house. They just moved on to the next target. In August, Tiffany started posting on social media. Vague, exciting updates. "Big things coming," she wrote. "So blessed to have parents who believe in me. Adulting is hard, but worth it." I saw the photos of her and her fiancé, Tyler, standing on my parents' front porch, holding a bottle of champagne. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly what was happening. Tiffany wasn't bright when it came to money. She had never read a contract in her life. She trusted mom and dad blindly because she had never been given a reason not to. They were her heroes. I realized then that they were running the same con on her. But instead of framing it as help us, they were framing it as a gift. They were wrapping a financial death sentence in a pretty bow and handing it to their golden child. Part of me wanted to call her immediately. Part of me wanted to scream the truth. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored and marginalized for 25 years, hesitated. Tiffany had spent her whole life taking from me. She had taken their attention, their money, their praise. She'd watched me struggle and laughed. But Tyler was a decent guy. He was hardworking. He didn't deserve this. So, I decided to wait. I decided to gather proof. I wasn't going to just warn them. I was going to make sure the evidence was undeniable. Because if I was going to drop a bomb on this family, I wasn't going to do it in a private phone call. I was going to do it when everyone was watching. I didn't just wait for Thanksgiving to roll around. I prepared for it like I was preparing for a trial. If I was going to expose my parents, I couldn't just throw out accusations. In my family, accusations were just drama. Facts were the only things that stuck. And even then, my parents were experts at twisting reality. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, black and white, ink on paper proof. I spent the next 3 months doing a deep dive into my parents' finances. Being in the industry gave me access to public records and databases that the average person wouldn't know how to navigate. What I found was worse than I expected. It wasn't just a second mortgage. It was a financial house of cards that was seconds away from collapsing. I pulled the title report on the house first. There were 3 liens against the property. 3. The first was the original mortgage, which they had barely paid down in 20 years. The second was a massive home equity line of credit they had maxed out to pay for vacations, cars, and appearances. And the third was a terrifying high-interest private loan they had taken out 6 months ago, likely to keep the bank from foreclosing on the first 2. The total debt on the house was worth more than the house itself. They were underwater by at least $100,000. Then, I looked at the gift. Transfer document standard templates available online that I suspected they were using for Tiffany. The terms were buried in the fine print, but the legal mechanism was clear. It was a quitclaim deed combined with an assumption of liability. In plain English, it meant that Mom and Dad would transfer the ownership of the house to Tiffany, but the debt would stay attached to the property. By signing as the new owner and refinancing, which they were undoubtedly pushing her to do, she would legally inherit every single cent of their bad decisions. They weren't giving her a legacy. They were looking for a fresh house to attach their parasitic debt to. They had drained their own credit dry, and now they needed Tiffany's pristine credit score to keep the game going for another few years. As November approached, the text messages from my mother started ramping up. They were sickly sweet. "Can't wait to see you for Thanksgiving. And Tiffany is so excited to show you the new house." The new house. She was already speaking as if the transfer had happened. It made my blood boil. Every time I saw a notification from them, I imagined Tiffany's life imploding. I imagined her young fiancé Taylor, working overtime to pay off a debt he didn't create. I imagined them losing everything before they even started their marriage. I debated calling Tiffany. I really did. I sat with my phone in my hand for hours one night. But I knew my sister. If I called her and said, "Mom and Dad are scamming you," she wouldn't believe me. She would run straight to Mom. Mom would spin it. She would say I was jealous. She would say I was trying to ruin Tiffany's big moment because I was bitter about moving away. They would gaslight her, and I would be uninvited from Thanksgiving. And if I wasn't there, I couldn't stop it. No, I had to let them set the stage. I had to let them think they had won. I had to catch them in the act, in front of an audience, so they couldn't spin their way out of it. Thanksgiving morning was gray and cold. I packed my overnight bag, but the most important item wasn't my clothes. It was a stiff black presentation folder. Inside, I had organized everything. The title search, the lien documents, the foreclosure warnings, and a printout of the fair market value of the house. I had highlighted the crucial numbers in neon yellow. It was a weapon of mass destruction made of paper. The drive to the suburbs took 3 hours. I didn't listen to music. I just rehearsed what I was going to say. I played out every scenario. Dad yelling, Mom crying, Tiffany accusing me of sabotage. I steeled myself against the guilt. That is the hardest part about dealing with toxic parents. They install a guilt button in you when you are a child, and they know exactly how to push it. I had to dismantle that button, wire by wire, before I walked through that door. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked perfect. There was a wreath on the door made of autumn leaves. The lawn was raked. It looked like the setting of a heartwarming holiday movie. It was sickening how good they were at the performance. I walked up the steps and took a deep breath. The smell of roasting turkey and sage hit me before I even knocked. The door swung open, and there was Mom. She was wearing an apron over a dress that I knew cost more than my monthly car payment. "Sarah," she squealed, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a wrestling hold. "We were worried you wouldn't make it with the traffic." She smelled like expensive perfume and white wine. She pulled back and looked me over, her eyes scanning for flaws. "You look tired, honey. Are you working too much?" "You know, stress ages you." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, stepping past her. The house was buzzing. My aunts and uncles were in the living room watching football. My cousins were running around the basement, and there, holding court in the kitchen, was Tiffany. She looked radiant. I have to give her that. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater dress and her hair was perfectly curled. She was directing Dad on how to carve the ham, pointing a knife like a conductor's baton. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny glitch in the matrix, before beaming bright again. "Hey, stranger," she called out. She came over and gave me a side hug, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "I'm so glad you came. Today is going to be huge, I bet it is," I said neutral. I looked around for Tyler. I found him in the corner of the kitchen, nursing a beer. He looked happy but nervous. Tyler was a good guy. He was a mechanic who had started his own shop. He worked with his hands. He was honest. He was completely out of his league with my family's level of manipulation. "Hey, Tyler," I said, walking over to him. "How are things?" He smiled, a genuine lopsided grin. "Good, Sarah. Really good. Business is picking up and, well, you know. Tiff says we're getting a big leg up today. It's going to change everything for us." My heart broke a little. He thought they were getting a head start. He didn't know they were getting an anchor tied around their ankles. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's definitely going to change things." Dinner was called at 4 o'clock. We all shuffled into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the plates we were unallowed to touch when we were kids. They were place cards. I walked around the table looking for my name. Mom sat at one end, Dad at the other. Tiffany and Tyler were seated to Dad's right, the position of honor. My aunts and uncles filled in the middle. Finally, I found my card. I was seated at the far end, next to the kitchen door, beside my deaf great aunt and a folding chair that had been squeezed in at the last minute. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Tiffany was the heir apparent, seated at the right hand of the king. I was the help seated near the door so I could clear the plates. I sat down and placed my bag under my chair. I could feel the hard edge of the folder against my ankle. It was grounding. The conversation during dinner was painful. It was the usual Nolan family highlight reel. Dad talked about his golf game. Mom talked about her garden club. Everyone gushed over Tiffany's dress, Tiffany's hair, Tiffany's upcoming wedding. Whenever I tried to speak, to mention my promotion or my new apartment, the conversation would gloss over me. "That's nice, dear," Mom would say, and then immediately turn to Tiffany. "Oh, Tiff, did you tell Aunt Linda about the venue you looked at?" I ate my turkey. It was dry. I drank my water. I watched them. I watched my parents exchange secret, excited glances. I watched them pour more wine into Tyler's glass, loosening him up. I watched the way Dad looked at Tiffany, not with love, but with the look a predator gives a meal. As the plates were cleared for dessert, the energy in the room shifted. It became electric. Everyone knew something was happening. Mom was practically vibrating in her seat. Dad cleared his throat loudly. "All right, everyone," Dad boomed, standing up. "Before we cut the pie, we have a little announcement. A very special announcement." He gestured to Tiffany. My sister stood up. She picked up her champagne glass. And we were back to the moment where the story began. The tap of the spoon. The silence. The smile. "Mom and Dad are signing the house to me," she said, her voice echoing in the sudden quiet. I watched the room erupt. I watched the joy on Tyler's face. I watched the triumph on my parents' faces. They thought they had pulled it off. They thought the ink was as good as dry. I reached down and unzipped my bag. I felt the cool plastic of the folder. I waited for the applause to die down. I waited for the congratulations to fade. And then I locked eyes with my father. He looked at me and he saw it. He saw the lack of emotion in my eyes. He saw the slight curl of my lip. He looked at the black folder I was now placing on the white tablecloth. And for the first time in his life, my father looked afraid. The silence that followed my question was heavier than the humid air outside. It felt physical, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Dada's face went from a flush of victory to a ghostly gray in the span of a heartbeat. He looked at the folder under my hand, then at me, and his jaw worked silently, like he was trying to form words but had forgotten how to speak. My sister Tiffany looked confused. Her smile flickered, uncertain. She looked at Dad, then at me. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" she asked, her voice high and tight. "What is she talking about, Dad?" Dad tried to recover. He forced a laugh, but it came out sounding like a choke. "Oh, ignore her, Tiffany. You know how Sarah gets. She is just trying to spoil the moment because she is jealous. Let's cut the cake. Who wants cake?" He reached for the knife, his hand trembling visibly. I didn't move my eyes from him. I spoke clearly, projecting my voice so that even my deaf great-aunt at the end of the table would catch the vibration of it. "I'm not jealous, Dad," I said. "I'm just trying to save my sister from bankruptcy." That stopped him. The knife clattered onto the platter. My mother gasped, a sharp, theatrical sound. "Sarah," she hissed. "Stop this right now. You are ruining Thanksgiving." I ignored her. I opened the black folder. The sound of the stiff plastic cover flipping open seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. I pulled out the first document, the title report with the neon yellow highlights. "Before you accept this generous gift, Tiffany," I said, sliding the paper across the white tablecloth toward her, "you should probably know what comes attached to it." Tiffany looked down at the paper, but she didn't touch it. She looked terrified, like the paper might bite her. "What is this?" she whispered. "It is a title report," I explained, keeping my voice calm and professional. "It shows who owns the house and what debts are attached to it. You see those 3 lines highlighted in yellow?" I pointed. My finger didn't shake. "Those are liens, Tiffany. That is debt. Mom and Dad aren't giving you a house. They're giving you a house that has 3 mortgages on it, and they are currently 6 months behind on payments." The room erupted, not with cheers this time, but with gasps and murmurs. My Uncle Bob, who had been cheering the loudest earlier, leaned forward, his eyebrows knitted together. "Mark?" Uncle Bob asked my father. "Is that true?" Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "This is private family business," he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Sarah has no right to be snooping in our finances. She is lying. She is manipulating the numbers." I didn't yell back. I didn't need to. I just pulled out the next document. "I'm not manipulating anything," I said coolly. "This is a foreclosure notice from the bank, dated 3 weeks ago. It says that if $40,000 isn't paid by December 1st, the bank is seizing the property." I held the paper up so the room could see the bold red letters at the top. Notice of default. I turned to my sister. "They didn't tell you, did they?" I asked softly. "They didn't tell you that the house is underwater. They didn't tell you that by signing that deed, you aren't just getting the house. You are legally assuming responsibility for the debt. They want you to use your credit, and Tyler's credit, to refinance a sinking ship because no bank will lend to them anymore." Tiffany finally reached out and took the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. She read the lines I had highlighted. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Mom. "Mom?" she said, her voice sounding very small, like a child's. "Is this true? Is the house in foreclosure?" Mom burst into tears. It was her go-to defense mechanism. She buried her face in her napkin, sobbing loudly. "We were doing it for you," she wailed. "We wanted you to have the house. We just needed a little help to get back on our feet. We would have paid you back." That was the admission. The room went cold. Tyler, who had been sitting frozen this whole time, suddenly stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He looked at the paper in Tiffany's hand, then at my parents. His face wasn't confused anymore. It was furious. "You told me the house was paid off," Tyler said. His voice was low, shaking with suppressed rage. "Last week at the barbecue. You looked me in the eye, Mark, and you told me the house was free and clear. You said it was a wedding gift to give us a head start." Dad tried to put on his salesman face, but he was sweating. "Tyler, listen, son. It is complicated. Real estate is complicated. We have equity. It is just tied up right now. We figured you kids could refinance, get a lower rate, and we would handle the monthly payments. We are a family. We help each other." Tyler laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Help each other? You were going to let me sign my name to a $400,000 debt without telling me? You were going to ruin my credit before we even got married?" He turned to Tiffany. "Did you know about this?" he asked her. Tiffany shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. No, Ty, I swear. They told me it was a gift. I didn't know. I watched them." I watched the realization wash over my sister that her heroes were villains. I watched my parents shrink in their chairs, stripped of their power. My Aunt Diane spoke up from across the table. Her voice was sharp. "Linda, you told me you guys were retiring to Florida. You told me the house sale was just to liquidate assets. You were going to leave these kids with this mess and move to another state?" Mom couldn't answer. She just kept sobbing into her napkin. Dad turned his anger on me. He pointed a shaking finger across the table. "You did this," he spat. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat. You couldn't stand that your sister was getting something nice. You had to ruin it. You have always been jealous of her." I stood up then. I felt 10 feet tall. "I'm not jealous, Dad," I said. "I'm the only person in this room who cared enough about Tiffany to tell her the truth. You were going to sacrifice her financial future to save your own reputation. You were going to let her start her marriage in bankruptcy court just so you didn't have to admit you were broke." I looked at Tiffany. "I pulled the property records because I knew something was wrong when they asked me to sign 6 months ago," I told her. "They tried to do this to me first, Tiff. When I said no, they moved on to you. You were Plan B." Tiffany looked at me, then at our parents. The betrayal on her face was absolute. It was the look of someone whose entire reality had just shattered. Tyler didn't wait for any more explanations. He threw his napkin on the table. "I'm done," he said. He looked at Tiffany. "If you sign those papers, Tiff, we are done. I love you, but I am not marrying into a fraud. I have worked too hard to build my business to let your parents burn it down." He walked out of the dining room. We heard his heavy boots on the hardwood, then the front door opening and slamming shut. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Tiffany let out a sob that sounded like it tore her throat. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "Tyler, wait!" she screamed. She ran after him. Now it was just me, my parents, and 20 stunned relatives. My grandmother, who rarely spoke, cleared her throat. She looked at my father with a disappointment that was colder than anger. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Mark," she said quietly. Dad looked around the room, looking for an ally. He looked at his brothers, his sisters, his friends. But nobody would meet his eye. The illusion was gone. The perfect family mask had slipped, and underneath, everyone could see the rot. He turned to me, his eyes full of hate. "Get out of my house," he whispered. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my bag. I picked up the folder. "Gladly," I said. I walked out of the dining room, past the uneaten turkey, past the deflated balloons. I walked out the front door into the cold November air. I saw Tiffany sitting on the front steps, crying into her hands. Tyler's truck was gone. I stopped. Part of me wanted to keep walking. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so." But seeing her there, broken, wearing that ridiculous expensive dress, I just felt sad. I sat down next to her. She didn't look up. "He left," she choked out. "He actually left." "He will come back," I said, "once he calms down. Once he realizes you were a victim too. But you have to choose, Tiff. You can't play both sides anymore." She looked up at me. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. Why would they do that? She asked. Why would they lie to me? Because they love themselves more than they love us, I said. It is a hard truth, but it is the truth. I stood up. I'm going back to the city. If you need a place to stay, a place that isn't foreclosing, you have my number. I walked to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw the police lights flashing in my rearview mirror. Wait, police? Yes. Because apparently, while I was exposing them inside, the bank had sent a process server to officially serve the foreclosure papers. And my father, in his rage, had decided to take a swing at the guy on the front lawn. I didn't keep driving. I couldn't. Despite everything, despite the lies, the manipulation, and the cruel toast, I pulled my car to the curb and watched through the rearview mirror. The red and blue lights washed over the perfectly manicured lawn, turning the scene into a surreal nightmare. My father, the man who cared more about his reputation than his own children, was shouting at a police officer. The process server, a guy just doing his job, was holding his jaw. My mother was screaming on the front porch, clutching her pearls like she was in a soap opera. And the neighbors? The neighbors were all out. The people my parents had spent 30 years trying to impress were standing on their porches, watching Mark Nolan get handcuffed on Thanksgiving Day. It was the ultimate humiliation. The one thing they feared more than bankruptcy was public scandal. And they had just created the biggest scandal the neighborhood had seen in a decade. I watched them put Dad in the back of the cruiser. He looked small, defeated, and angry. Even from a distance, I could tell he wasn't thinking about what he had done wrong. He was thinking about who he could blame. And I knew that blame would land squarely on me. I drove away before the police could ask me for a statement. I didn't want to be a witness. I had already been the judge and the jury. The next few weeks were a blur of chaos. My phone blew up with messages from my mother. They ranged from vicious attacks calling me a traitor, a snake, a destroyer of families, to pathetic begging. We need bail money, she texted one night. We need a lawyer. How can you do this to us? I blocked her number. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, cutting that final cord, but I knew if I answered, they would drag me back under. Tiffany showed up at my apartment door 3 days later. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she was wearing sweatpants. She didn't have a suitcase, just a duffel bag. Tyler broke up with me, she said, standing in my hallway. I didn't say, I told you so. I just opened the door and let her in. We sat on my couch drinking cheap wine, and for the first time in our adult lives, we actually talked. Not the fake, polite conversation we performed for our parents, but real talk. She told me everything. How Mom and Dad had pressured her. How they made her feel special, like she was the savior of the family. They had convinced her that the house transfer was a clever business move, a way to keep the property in the family. They had played on her vanity and her naivety. I felt so stupid, Sarah, she cried. I almost signed my life away. I almost dragged Tyler into a hole we never would have climbed out of. You didn't know, I told her. They are professionals at this. They have had 30 years of practice. The house went into foreclosure 2 months later. The bank didn't care about their reputation. They auctioned it off on the courthouse steps. It sold for less than what was owed. My parents walked away with nothing. No equity. No legacy. Just a bruised ego and a criminal record for assault. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It is a fine apartment, nothing wrong with it, but for people like Mark and Linda, it is a prison. They don't have a dining room to host grand dinners anymore. They don't have a lawn to show off. They don't have an audience. I hear from my Aunt Diane that they spend most of their time complaining about me. They tell anyone who will listen that their ungrateful daughter Sarah stole their house and turned their other daughter against them. They have rewritten history to make themselves the victims. But here is the thing about the truth. It doesn't care if you believe it or not. Tiffany didn't go back to them. That was the biggest surprise. I thought she would crack. I thought the withdrawal from their praise would be too much. But losing Tyler broke something in her, or maybe it fixed something. She realized that being the golden child wasn't a privilege. It was a job. And the pay was terrible. She got a job as a receptionist. She rented a studio apartment. She started paying her own bills. It was hard. She called me crying about budgeting and loneliness more times than I can count. But slowly, she started to become a real person. 6 months ago, Tyler reached out to her. He saw that she hadn't gone back to mom and dad. He saw that she was trying. They are taking it slow, going on dates, rebuilding trust. I don't know if they will get married, but at least now if they do, it will be real. As for me, I got a promotion last week. I bought my own place, a condo in the city with a view of the skyline. When I signed the papers, my hand didn't shake. I read every single line. And when the realtor handed me the keys, I didn't have to thank anyone but myself. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving this year. Tiffany came to my place. We ordered Chinese food and ate it on the floor of my living room. There were no toasts, no speeches, no matching sweaters. Just two sisters laughing about how bad we are at using chopsticks. It was the best Thanksgiving of my life. I still think about that empty chair at the dining table. The one my parents tried to trap me in. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight for your seat at the table. It is to realize that the table is rotten, the food is poisoned, and the people sitting there would rather see you starve than admit they are full. Sometimes, the only way to win is to flip the table and walk away. So, to everyone listening tonight who feels like the invisible child, or the scapegoat, or the ATM for their family, stop waiting for them to change. Stop waiting for them to apologize. They won't. Document everything. Protect your peace. And remember, no is a complete sentence. My parents wanted a legacy. Well, they got one. They are the cautionary tale I will tell my children one day. They are the example of exactly what not to be. And honestly, that is worth more than any house they could have given me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe.